Colleagues on Teams, can you hear us okay? Wayne, yeah, brilliant.
Yes.
Going through item 10.1 and onwards now in the performance and resources. So if we start with item 10.1, we leave it for the Deputy Chief Executive to orchestrate, please, integrated performance dashboard and report month 12.
Yeah, I won't do a preamble this month. We'll go straight into it, section by section, if that's okay. So I can hand over to Lynn.
So, yeah, that's fine. So I'll take you through the quality and safety, just an executive summary. So there has been one never event in the month related to a paediatric ophthalmology case in which the wrong muscle was accessed. The incident was rectified while the child was still anaesthetised, so duty of care was performed at the time. When you talk to the ophthalmologist about it, it is a tiny, tiny little, the muscles are very tiny, it's very difficult to see. They have put some additional steps into the safety checklist, which weren't there, but internally they've made some improvements on that. And it's really about checking at the time. The falls, total number of falls has reduced in month. We've only had two results. We've had two results in moderate Hammond. Both the patients have capacity and were independently mobile, and we have had no fractured neck of femur this month. So if you think back to the other month, it's been frail elderly patients who are in fractured neck of femur. So we've had one fractured pivot rani that was treated conservatively and so we continue in our focus on improvement. The pressures have plateaued, no increase for 3 months. Still a concern and still a focus on improving our approach to greater pressures, but what I can report is that the lapses in care, particularly from documentation, are becoming very sort of small numbers now. So we feel a little bit more confident that we can say that some of the pressure ulcers are unavoidable because of the patient's journey into hospital, and a real focus in ED around preventing pressure ulcers with new mattresses. Any grade 3 or grade 4 pressure ulcers reported. And then I'll hand to Jane to go through VTE mortality.
So VTE comes first. We maintain our performance around 85%, which is below our target of 95%, and work is ongoing. We keep uncovering slight changes with the data month on month as we're looking deeper into it. And as you can see, it's detailed around cardiology looking deeper at their data because they appear to be doing them for some things and not for others. But we're at 85%.
Just project your voice.
Sorry, it's really loud in my head. So, mortality. Our overall mortality is absolutely fantastic. Actually, if you look back on the graphs, we've had a mortality below 100 for the last year. So 100, what we're measuring with mortality, there's slightly different measures, but what we are measuring is the expected number of deaths versus the actual number of deaths. And so 100 would be if they were absolutely equal. Less than 100 is when we have less deaths than would be expected. So we've had less deaths than would be expected for the last 12 months. However, within that, we know that there are certain groups that have issues. The one that has been a long-standing problem for us is fractured neck of femur. That data has come down historically. It did bubble back up in the last month. The working group that is working around that continues to do it, and I do expect that we'll see little bubbles going down at times. The other area that we've looked at, or the two areas, are peripheral and visceral atherosclerosis. So ischemic bowels and ischemic limbs and things. There are no concerns about the terms of the care, and those cases will be looked at. The one that has got worse is the acute cerebrovascular disease, so acute strokes. And our scores have got worse in the previous month. Most of that sits within medicine and RLI, and we're looking at the coding of that because there are quite often, what we find is there are quite often people who've got strokes or cerebrovascular disease on their death certificates, but actually we've got no evidence during their period of hospitalisation that is the case. So the care group have been struggling in the last month to complete the review of the random sample due to pressures of strikes and other operational pressures. So, but they continue to do that, and that's followed through our mortality steering group and through to quality assurance group. So that's all I was going to say on it.
I'll take questions at the end if that's right, Chris, when all the officers have gone through the report.
Thanks, Chair. So we'll go in order of the report. So Chief People Officer, please.
So just before I go into this, it's really helpful to just reflect now that the new people governance arrangements are going to people committee for approval in a couple of weeks' time. And that'll mean that there are programme boards established under people committee with their own dashboards that are linked in with the IPR as well. So it just gives you kind of an assurance that the governance arrangements are now being developed in the people portfolio. So if I just pick out a few salient points from the IPR here, core skills training. I think one of the key things that we need to identify here is that for a lot of our materials, we're using locally designed content. We have now agreed that we'll be transitioning across to national content, and that will help us, particularly because when people transfer in and out of organisations, it'll help us to be able to prevent people redoing their training, which will then obviously have an impact on the overall compliance rate. So the care groups are where there are levels of underperformance have been asked to provide their recovery plans. Part of that is some data cleansing that is needing to take place, but equally there is some really different approaches that we've taken, particularly with estates and facilities where there's little or restricted access to IT. So we've actually delivered some face-to-face sessions using the content for those colleagues that has really supported them to ramp up their compliance levels. Vacancies, I think what we've got here, because obviously there is a kind of special cause variation that's identified now. I think what we've got to be careful of with this is jumping to the conclusion that means that we've kind of got an issue with the vacancy rate. Overall, the vacancy rate actually remains really stable, and the transitions where we see the differences happen, particularly where we have business cases that are funded where additional posts go in, and obviously it takes a time period for those positions to be recruited. So I just wanted to contextualise the fact that if you look at the turnover rate, they're stable. So it's showing that the issues are where we've actually put those funded positions in, either through business cases or through the safety staffing review. And we are going to do some work based on stakeholder feedback, because there are some delays that have been caused in the kind of recruitment journey, particularly around the compliance requirements with the diverse panels, and also with some challenges that we've had around AAC arrangements. So that's the appointment of consultant arrangements. So I've got there before you, Mike, with him. There you go. So we're going to do some continuous improvement reviews on those, just to see how we can make sure that we don't lose the intent, but we actually might make sure that we're not going to lose candidates because of delays in the recruitment process. So that's coming through the people governance arrangements in the next month or so. In terms of sickness, I think this is actually a really quite good story. So we've seen some, the decreases that we've seen now are particularly prevalent around the musculoskeletal absences and the absences that are related to stress. And this is particularly around long-term sickness cases. So there's been a huge focus within the care group leadership team around managing those long-term sickness cases. And that's now seen quite a significant amount of those cases coming to conclusion. I've personally led some case reviews for all cases of sickness absence that have exceeded 6 months now, and to make sure that we've got agreed case management plans, and that'll be picked up on a sustainable basis by my restructuring of the senior team within people services. And finally, on appraisal, the new appraisal programme is due, still on track for launch in June, and that is meaning that the focus in that there is not only about increasing the compliance rate with appraisals, but crucially making them really meaningful and high quality discussions that are had.
Okay, thank you. So the finance section next. So since the report was prepared based on the information available at the end of February that's in the pack today, the trust has of course compiled and submitted its accounts for the year for review by the auditors. So I am able to present an update on forecast year-end positions presented in the report. Due to the extended 23-24 planning process and revised timetable, we were asked to take the opportunity in this context to review risk, completeness and accuracy of any estimates or judgments contained in the 22-23 financial position, having the benefit of greater visibility of costs and risk through the latest financial information available. This enabled us to further validate and review actual costs and pressures relating to the financial year and to consider the risk appetite in this context through a process and timetable supported by the ICB and the region. As a result, the board received an update last week on proposed amendments to the year-end financial position from that previously reported and which was supported by the ICB and NHSE is consistent with the achievement of organisational system financial targets for the year, and with a revised deficit of 14.1 million reported in our financial statements, which of course are now subject to audit to formal sign-off of the accounts through the normal process. So it doesn't, this update doesn't directly impact on the other key messages contained within the executive summary of the IPR, other than to strengthen the trust cash position in relative terms going into the new financial year. So whilst this is a deficit position, it presents significant progress against the start point position against the plan for the year, and the trust has increased the level of recurrent financial improvement for both actual and percentage terms for each of the last 2 financial years. The analysis contained in the finance section of the IPR will of course be updated as part of the preparation of the month 12 report. However, the key actions that we've set out in the document remain as stated in pages 124 to 131, all of which are consistent with the progression of our refreshed sustainable financial improvement programme for the 23-24 finance committee. The Finance and Performance Committee will also receive an addendum to the month 12 report that's already been received. Obviously, we've already briefed the chair of the committee about this process. The board will also note from the information presented on page 131 that as the COVID emergency financial regime unwinds, the cash balance is reduced from the high level sustained due to cash injections into the system during that period. And we have a deficit plan for 23-24, and that of course will require cash support by NHS England as the residual balances become utilised. We will follow a mandated process associated with this. There is a prescribed process, and the internal governance and oversight arrangements that will follow, and we'll specifically report on that throughout the new financial year. Thank you. Okay. And I'll hand over to Chief Operating Officer.
Thanks, Chris. So for urgent and emergency care, February was a particularly good month with us having top decile performance in England. The report doesn't, but I'd like to draw out the performance of the new urgent treatment centre at RLI, where having aimed for 25% of the acute take going through that new facility, we've already reached that point where 22 to 28% of the take is going through the new UTC, which is excellent. So it's certainly a much better patient and staff experience, and we've therefore, as an early measure, stretched our target to have at least a third of the take going through the UTC. For 4-hour performance, our February data came out of special cause concern for the first time in 16 months. That's a really important point, with performance of 79.8% for 4 hours. A more difficult month in April sees that nearer 72%. 12 hours again came out of special cause concern for the first time in 9 months into common cause variation, with fewer than 5% of patients waiting for 12 hours. A more difficult March and April sees that near 7%. And importantly, for the population, our ambulance handover metrics improved to the highest point for in the last 20 months, whereas in special cause improvement for the last 2 data points, which is significant for 15-minute ambulance handover at 61%. For stroke, we've described previously the Q3 performance has been a B at Furness and a C at RLI. Those are validated data. Tentatively, I feel comfortable appraising the board that our performance, unvalidated performance for Q4 is a grade A at Furness and a grade B at RLI. So the best scores we've had. And of course, scores important. What does that mean? Well, it means patients are getting more timely access to the stroke unit, rapid imaging, and importantly in these data, more therapy minutes and earlier access to therapy. The ongoing excellent urgent community response continues now in the mid-90s% against a 70% target. One that I'm really keen to draw out because the significant work done by the team is our diagnostics. So we've now got 2 consecutive data points at less than the 5% target, and that puts us in the top decile in England. 2.4% last month, with a trajectory to less than 2% from June, which really makes us stand out positively. In cancer, 9 of the 10 targets are in common cause variation. 3 really important ones I'd like to pull out. The 20-day faster diagnostic standard, we've seen 13 months of exceeding that target. 2-week waits, we've been better than target for 4 consecutive months, and 4 consecutive data points of special cause improvement. That's a very significant piece of work to achieve that. And the proportion of the cancer waiting list beyond 62 days is at less than 4%, which is the second best performance trust in the region. Finally, access to elective care. We celebrated last time at board the achieving 0 78-week breaches by the end of March. And for completeness, the PAC says 65, which was accurate in February, but we did achieve 0 78 weeks in March. My concern had been that we may have a bounce back phenomenon in April, having achieved that in March, but I'm pleased to say that we've seen 0 capacity related 78-week breaches in April, which should give us a great level of confidence in our trajectories towards 65 weeks over the rest of the year. And then final point is you could look at the graph on page 142 and look at the continuing increasing waiting list size, and that would be a fair question. Our modelling is that increasingly upwards line will plateau over the summer months and come down over the winter months and resemble more of a bell-shaped curve by that stage, because we'll have achieved our long waiting targets and be into the middle of the waiting list rather than at the tail end. But it's worth noting in that regard, we remain in the top quartile in the northwest for our referral to treatment time. Okay.
Thanks, Scott. Chris, that's how we would chat. But just comment before I open it up. We get these data sets and you feed it back to us, Scott, and other colleagues do the same. And then within that are things like best performing, second best, or third best. We get A's and B's and stroke phenomenal, because if you look at the quarter, I think it's about the 6th quarter now, so we're getting A to C, B to C. But as Aaron would say, does that feel like a softball trust when you look at that data? It doesn't. And our job, I guess, is triangulating that data and getting the softer intelligence. But I just want to know, that these reports are prepared and presented in the way that you've presented them. But in there are key nuggets about these are not just little bits of growth that are going across the trust now. This is showing evidence of month after month of either embeddedness or continuity or enhancement. I just want to acknowledge that really, and we could thank that. It has been a really difficult 2 years, but it is a real tribute to the staff that not only are we getting through the 2 years, but we are turning out data that allows us to hold our heads up in the region when we compare it with everything. So we have got data now. I just want to acknowledge that really. That doesn't mean, of course, there aren't issues that we need to address, and there are still areas that I think we could improve on, and we certainly will have to get to SOC 2. But I think the car has been repaired. Now we take it out on the road. How fast it goes. Okay. Hello, Nicola. So Karen Sackey, yourself, you. Karen, then Sackey.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Mike. And yeah, absolutely commend all of those people who've contributed to the improved performance, and also all of those teams that are generating this IPR for us in such a systematic way. It makes such a difference. I'm really thinking forwards to the kind of business as usual approach and what that might mean for us in terms of reporting, and just really conscious that understandably the data that we see here is up to February, and we're now in the beginning of May, and I know that people presenting it, I think notably Chris and Scott today, updated into March and April, and I know that the IPR is due for a refresh towards May to really in line with the next year's or this year's rather operational plan. I'm just wondering if there are opportunities for the data that we see at board to be even more up to date in looking forward to that business as usual, more proactive approach. I recognise that's challenging to do, but I just wonder if there are opportunities for us to do that within that IPR refresh.
Well, it's a question that's been asked a few times, Chair, and with the moving timetable, it's one we'll run through the processes to be able to give a comprehensive response to that. So it's really important that we got this IPR in place, that we've got the data quality right, and that it went through the appropriate review and governance. But the timetables have changed a little bit that allow us to review, so I will do that.
And I think that just to add to it, Chris, we will be talking as a board over the summer about how we get to BAU. And just to confirm what we said last month, BAU, business as usual, is not a downsizing or a lowering of our expectations. It's the audit term for, is the trust running efficiently and effectively? And that's where when we use the term BAU or business as usual, if you just keep it in that context, that we're not talking about slowing down or lowering any of the effort, but really about the point that Karen's made about getting our reports and responding to assurance so that we keep going towards soft clue. Thanks for that, Chris. Okay, Sackey. I'm sorry, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, follow up on that, because I suppose the key thing about the IPR is it gives us the trend data over time. So one of the reasons we knew there was a lag is because actually it shows us over time what direction the data is going in. So it is useful to get the real-time update, particularly around confirming the 78-week wait, for example. Yeah. But for me, there is assurance that comes through the fact that we have those data points over time. So I think it's just making sure that the whole process works.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Sackey.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just wanted to join Karen as well. This is one of the very well laid out performance report I read in my various documents that I read. It just highlights some of the good practice, particularly the 2-hour urgent response in the community consistently has been one of the best metrics that we've tracked. And I've been studying the last few reports and how the assurance column has changed. If I draw your attention to the assurance column in each section of the IPR, we have a pass or a fail or a hit and miss. And the one left to that is whether it is good or common cause or special cause, low or high. Blue meaning good and orange meaning not so good. Just reflecting that the assurance column, apart from some elements of well-led and indeed the 2-hour response in the community, much of that is hit and miss in the last few reports I've just been studying from today going past. So just wanted to highlight that as in terms of what you were just saying, Mike, about going towards soft 2 and what steps the board might want to understand in order to get that from a hit and miss to constant pass, which we need to see, I think. So that's one thing I just wanted to highlight for the attention of the board. The other thing we probably will come back to in the future ones, because there are in the 23-24 priorities, which I highlight as one of the things that we may want to consider is the workforce race equality standards, disability equality standards, being identified as a priority, and there are so much data. You may want to track that as part of the IPR. I'll just leave it there, Mike. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things for the board's attention. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to come back to that?
Yeah, we've discussed the inclusion of the race equality metrics previously, so we're anticipating that that will be incorporated into the updated version that we bring back for approval in due course. And just one thing, it's really helpful to have the feedback around the assurance column. We're using the IPR specifically as a way of feeding into our improvement program that we remain focused on the right things. And our improvement program is absolutely built around that principle of embeddedness. So we will use the narrative that we've got here to feed that, but also obviously take the feedback to make sure that those who are helping us to populate the narrative here are reflecting on that as well.
Exactly. Thank you. Important points, really. Thank you.
Just a couple of points. Just thinking about the data. I mean, I think the important thing that we've moved to is that we actually want to see a continuous level of success or improvement before we actually can say that chart goes, that section of the chart goes to assured rather than hit or miss. And that's where I wear my smuggling hat.
Yeah.
Say, well, you know, so sounds like somebody from Hogwarts, doesn't it? Who wants to be in my group? Thinking about, I mean, there's some really impressive stuff in this report. I have to say, probably over the last 18 months, or since I've been a non-executive, it's probably hits me as being one of the, it's given me the best feeling of confidence of any set of data that we've seen. And I think the updates we've seen about stroke is particularly encouraging. I mean, I know it's not at the moment they're not validated data for the last quarter, but that level of improvement is, I think we just have to recognise how good that level of improvement from where we were 2 years ago is. I mean, because we were bad enough to have a Section 31 slapped on all our stroke services, really. So I think that has to be acknowledged. The cancer performance is excellent, and I think the 2-week wait and the faster diagnostic standard for me as a GP to see that data is really encouraging for me when I'm sending patients into the service. And I think that the thing I like this month particularly is the amount of national data comparators we've got in a number of areas that it says, because we've been looking for that, haven't we? We're looking at our performance over the last few months and that trend, but now we're seeing where we sit regionally and nationally. And although we don't rest on our laurels, but we want all of our data to move into the top quartile, but quite a lot of it's in the top decile. So I think that's amazing. One point I wanted to say, having just said my smuggling hat, is that follow-ups, which is people know is people pass their indicative review date or pass their data follow-up in outpatients. It does seem as if that's plateauing. I mean, I know we've only gotten up about 2 or 3 months where it actually, but there's been almost an exponential rise over the past 12 months in that data, and that seems to be leveling off, which is encouraging. We now obviously want to see it going down, but that's encouraging. And finally, just to give assurance that the quality committee has really dug into quite a lot of the quality data. So around the falls, we had a deep dive report in the last month, and what was interesting about that, it leads to some of our earlier discussion about people not meeting the criteria to reside, that the majority, well, I think it was, I've got the figure here, that was of the 9 patients reviewed who had serious, moderately serious impact of their fall, so had a fracture, a lot of them fractured neck of femurs. 5 of them, 5 of those patients were people who at that point, at the time of their fall, were not meeting the criteria to resign. So that's just a very obvious impact of people who stay in hospital too long. If they continue to be at risk of falling, and if they do, often it's a serious impact. We've got a deep dive going on around people who have pressure ulcers of category 2 or above, and looking at the lapses, and that will come to us. So we're going to look at that in detail. And the VTE data seem to have plateaued, and again, we've asked for a detailed report to come to us in June about that. So we are looking at those areas where things are not going as well as we would hope. But my general feeling is I'm really encouraged by this report, but there are areas that we are certainly on the quality committee we're continuing to monitor in detail.
VTE,
Sorry. Now, VTE assessment, this is the assessment that people undergo prior to admit, at admission to see what their risk is of developing a thrombosis in their legs, which then can lead to an embolism, which is a serious outcome. So, yeah. Venous thromboembolism, it stands for, but that doesn't really help anybody if I get that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to build on other people's comments, for me, I think this report is really starting to mature and develop in terms of, as well as identifying the headline issues, we're getting into some degree of granularity, aren't we? And we're actually able to identify what are the issues within the teams and the specific areas, and then there's evidence of impact and tailored approaches with evidence of being able to make that discernible difference in terms of the numbers on the ground. And the bit that I wanted to point to was, you covered it lightly in your report, Alison, was about the long-standing issue which has been reported to the board about the core skills framework, and specifically about the estates team. And we've heard that many times, haven't we? But the tailored responses which have gone in through Alison's team now to actually provide support to that team doing the face-to-face work on the ground when they're available, which has been the key issue, isn't it? Because they work in different work patterns in different locations, and that started to turn the numbers around. And I think that's real evidence before is it's that identification of the issue, that insight into how the team are actually working, that tailored response and a demonstrable impact. I think clear evidence of that with the report. So I'd like to commend it. In terms of the work it's made. I would like to ask a question of Alison about long COVID. And I know through my involvement with the people committee that it's been considered acquired through exposure through work activities in the past. I know that's one of the union positions which was put forward early days. And I'd just like to seek assurances that our staff team, where they've been impacted by long COVID, they're still being dealt with compassion and in line with national guidance for supporting their return to work or the retirement on sickness grounds.
Yeah, so one of my mantras with the team now is remember that there is a person and that person has feelings. So there's a real push around kind of dealing with people compassionately. That doesn't mean that we don't have to make some difficult choices. And we have now got one clinician in occupational health who is reviewing all of the outstanding long COVID cases in our for our staff, so that we can make sure that we're dealing with them in a consistent way. But it is, I think it's fair to say that yes, we are seen as a real forward exemplar of how we're managing the supported return to work arrangements. But I think there has to be an acknowledgement that some of these people will not be able to return to work, and they will be escalated through the process, and potentially some of them will and have their contract terminated on the basis of ill health capability. In terms of ill health retirement for long COVID cases is not something that the pensions agency are actively supporting at this point in time. So any decisions around termination of employment would be on ill health capability rather than on any ill health retirement grounds.
And that's in line with national guidance. Yeah, thank you.
The national guidance is that there is no, that long COVID should be treated in the same way as any other health related issue there. And the provisions around COVID or the extraordinary temporary provisions of there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm going to go to Alison, then Tony, and Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I just endorse that I love this report. I love a statistical process control. Yeah, I have to admit, I do love them. There were a couple of things there, and they've already been mentioned. You've already highlighted them. So one is venous thromboembolism, risk assessment and appraisal. But when we look at those in the context of an SPC chart, the upper and lower limits are way below the target. So unless, as an organisation, we do something significantly different, we're never going to achieve the target because everything is within, is below within those controls. So I know you've recognised it, and so it's okay. So what is going to happen to make that shift change? But also, especially for VTE, is the so what question. So if we could manage to hit the 95%. By making a system change in how we deliver that, what impact would that then having on individuals and patients? So the risk assessment, high risk, fantastic. You've recognised I'm at risk. So what am I getting my prophylaxis? Am I getting the appropriate treatment? Are we seeing a reduction in blood clots in legs and lungs?
Okay. Would you like to take that on? Okay.
Yeah, so we report those receiving a BT assessment on here. We do measure how many people get their treatment, and that sort of gets the next phase of the work. But you're right. I mean, we don't have a great deal of incidents that are related to hospital-acquired venous thromboembolism. They're all reported and investigated as a clinical incident. So we don't have a huge number of those, but you need to be back to the outcome you can with it that they are reduced or. I don't think we'll ever get to zero, but I bet they are reduced. Yeah.
I know the overall comment about that. If it doesn't change, why are we using the data? Is something I know Chris will take on board. Then the data. Okay, Tony.
Yeah, as new to this book, I do feel compelled to make a comment because I have to say I think this is quite remarkable. Because when you think of the pandemic, which we've all lived through, and the consequences of that, the improvement journeys you've been on, as a board, or we're on, and then more recent times industrial action. When you look at the actual levels of performance, I've been on other processes where I've sat in worse in more stable times. So that's not to be complacent, but I have to say I think it's a real impressive read. And like you, Alison, that was one of the points I was going to make about next steps in terms of where we aspire to. But the control charts, as I call in my old world, are just fantastic because it's the longitudinal trend of what you can see things are improving. But my first point is about the content of this because it's about the narrative, and it's Hugh's point about how are we using this, because we're getting this, and I'm sure there's things in hand, but how are we using this to reassure partners, primary care, local government, politicians, because reputationally, this is not the same organisation or set of arrangements as we were a number of years ago. So one's messaging. The second one's on the appraisal piece. So I read the piece, but I just would like to know, because it's a fundamental building block. But if you get it wrong, it's a disaster, and not all one size fits all. So I'd just be interested in terms of next steps, in terms of how you're going to go about that, if that's possible. And then in terms of the finance, it's really understanding going forward the inflationary impacts of all of this on the bottom line, because it's not insignificant, both in terms of cost pressures around heating, fuel, estates, maintenance, repairs, let alone pay and salaries. So there's two specifics, well, three, one about market messaging, one about the appraisals, and one about the money. Thank you, Chair.
Who would like, Chris?
I think we don't have a programme where we deployed this as a document and a process into other places. This has been very much a process that we developed through the Recovery Support Programme with support from the National Making Data Counts team, and has been absolutely fundamental to that programme of work. It is a moment where we are looking, subject to how the meetings go in the next 2 months around softball exit. We would expect this to be able to take a step on as part of our next programme of work at the point that Alison makes in terms of you're never going to hit these targets. That we've got a direct connection from this into the new improvement programme, and in particular whether it consistent fails with the QI, the quality improvement methodology we've been promoting. And then we will supplement this with trajectories next year. So the improvement trajectories will be entered into the chart. So the quality of this, we are getting a lot of positive feedback about the report itself. We're going to keep developing in terms of, and that can include how we use it in our management relationships and so forth around us. In terms of the money, what we will be doing is obviously there will be step changes in the run rate. There will be an expenditure run rate change, for example, on the back of the recent National Pay Award announcements and so forth. So we will find a way to draw those step changes out. We have reported through the year on inflation as well. So, but the finance section of the report, Tony, is the most recently done in this format. So as much of that to go through.
It is an important issue you raised, Greg, and for those who weren't on the board of the plan, we did make a conscious decision when the CQC came and we reported to softball that we wouldn't go out and spread messages or have a campaign or anything else. One, because it enabled defensive. Two, we wanted evidence of embeddedness and continuity. And I would argue even coming out of SOC 4 and SOC 3, it's still an RI, still requires improvement. And so we probably need to think very carefully about the tactics we use. But on the other hand, you make a good point about how we disseminate this. The statutory ones and the mandatory ones go to the ICB anyway. The SIBs will also scrutinise those results, and that's compared with fellow trusts, so they can see as well how we're doing in areas. And lastly, I guess we probably just need to find a way of getting these messages out to our own colleagues in the trust. Are they aware of this? And that's probably something that we probably need to consider. I met with the strong team a couple of weeks ago. I was saying how well they did. I was saying 5th quarter, and they were like, "Oh, 5th quarter." So you probably just need to spread it out to college. That the execs can think about that.
But I do think our clinical colleagues, for example, in primary care, that the reassurance they can give the patients at the when you know that your local trust is performing at present, and let's not rush into it. But if we get to the point where this occurs over several months, and we actually then share with colleagues, you can actually share with your patients that actually, because the question often is about, well, how it goes, and what about other places? How quickly will I be seen? And that sort of assurance, well, the trust is actually performing in the top 10% of the country at the moment in these areas, in the area where I'm about to present you. I mean, it doesn't answer every question, but it actually gives a level of confidence that perhaps has not been there before. And I think it gives confidence for our colleagues in other sectors of the health service. I think sharing with them as well as sharing within the trust, I think is a really important thing that we should consider as we go forward.
Yeah. Can we ask the exec to consider that perhaps after June the 9th?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Appraisals. So if I just pick that one up for you. So So there's been a series of workshops that have taken place over a number of months now, and that has involved line managers, it's involved staff from all different disciplines across the organisation to understand their perceptions of the current processes, what they'd like to see in something that was revamped and refreshed for them. And there's some learning from the medical appraisal process as well. So on the back of that, there's a kind of a framework that's now being developed, which isn't one size fits all, but would actually enter through the same process. So nobody will look any different in terms of how you enter the appraisal process, but there'll be different staging posts within the appraisal system that, dependent on the staff group or dependent on the leadership role that you have, will then prompt you into different phases of the appraisal discussion. And the key for this is that it's got to be a focus on something being in it for the individual employee, because they've got, I think it can't be seen as a tick box, it's got to be seen as value adding. So we need to align it to the strategic objectives and the corporate priorities. It's got to have something in there around a discussion around people's career aspirations and their personal development plans. And one of the things that will be signposting from this is if somebody indicates that they kind of have an inclination for career progression outside of their own area of work, where the line manager might not be able to do the signposting, we're again going to be able to link people into career conversations as well. So we'll have personal development plans, career development, and kind of alignment to career objectives within that process. And as it'll feel slightly different for different people at different levels and different staff groups, so that they can meet their revalidation requirements, or they can meet their kind of the things that are meaningful for them. That's all being factored in based on the feedback that we've had from colleagues.
Can I make a suggestion as well, that for new members of the board, if they wish to have discussions, whether that's NEDs to NEDs, NEDs to execs, or execs to NEDs, please feel free to do so outside the meeting. If there's anything coming up in the board agenda or discussions you think, oh, I'd like to ask more, I'm conscious of time now, so I'm probably going to start pushing people along a bit, but please feel free to contact the unity boards, so just contact each other. I've got Liz and I've got Karen still on performance, but please note that when we do the assurance report, there is an EPR outline business case that we need to deal with. And then we've got the strategy. I know Susanna Hargreaves is here, so we've still got a couple of meaty items to still get through, and we're trying to finish with 12. So forgive me if I'm seem to push you along a little bit now.
Thanks, Matt. And my comment was the question was about mortality, and Jane has answered it, but about because I couldn't in my head see how we were doing so well on stroke services, and yet it was going amber for separate that word. So you answered that, but you then made me go, and you made the comment about death certificates and reports saying mentioning stroke where there was no evidence of treatment for stroke. So what are we doing about that?
Well, that's part of this work here, is because there are certain conditions mainly associated with sort of elderly patients where the symptoms will be there, but there isn't a diagnostic test for it, and that's how it gets to be part of the death certificate. So they'll be working out
it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And then the next thing was about urgent care and looking at all the services that sit around supporting urgent care and the flow of patients through. And it was the little comment about the FDEC was underperforming against our trajectory, but the number of patients were consistent. So it didn't really make sense. And I just wondered if there was something maybe at finance and performance where we look at all these services that sit around the flow of patients through the organisation and how they're funded, how efficient they are, and how they contribute if they weren't there, given the value. I'm thinking around the fact that the 23-24 budgetary pressures that we're going to be under, but also keeping the performance up now, how we assess all those services and the affordability of them going forward.
I'll ask Chief Exec to come on.
Just a reminder of the process we've got around post-investment appraisal through the IPG, so there isn't a requirement for a deep dive or a bigger piece of work, because the function we've got around assurance will do the check and challenge and then the review, and any recommendations for service change will be visible through the finance committee. So just want to give that assurance that things like SDEC, frailty, PADO extension, UTC investment are all subject to the how effective is this, and we'll make a different decision. So that will come through the due process we've put in place around IPG.
Thank you. Karen, if you could bring us to an assurance issue, please.
Yeah, just in brief, related to the IPR, we know this is being more granularly implemented at care group level, and just thinking to business as usual and assurance, it strikes me that the voice that we hear perhaps less frequently in our assurance committees and at board is the voice of our staff and our care group leaders. And I wonder, in the schedule of business going forwards, recognising that the pressures there have been on people's time over the last several months, whether we might bring some of those care group triumvirates to assurance committees and the board more frequently, so that we can hear their examples of how they're using that data-driven decision making to evidence improvement.
I think we'll take that as a no, Karen, rather than a question. That's okay.
Yeah. If it could be considered for the schedule of business going forwards, that would be excellent.
Executive business, just to confirm.
Yeah.
And the board schedule of business. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks, Karen. Okay, colleagues, be comfortable to accept the IPRs. Thank you again to colleagues, and I know there'll be many points and they'll be fed back through the system, particularly thinking about some of the issues that were raised about distributing the report. We'll move on then to 10.2 minutes and 3A report. I'd like to welcome colleagues Andy Wiggs, Tim Povell, good to see you. Welcome. I know you're there on standby if we need to ask you to answer any of the questions that colleagues may raise, but we'll take it through in the way that it's presented in the agenda. So 10.2A Audit Committee. Liz, again, if I just ask the chairs, bring us any assurance issues to the board.
No, the report's there as read. The one thing though I would like to just note is that the internal audit, NAIA, the head of internal audit opinion for, well, it's still draft, but it should stand for 22-23 is substantial, which is a significant improvement for the organisation from where we've been.
That's really good news. Thank you. We'll take that as an assurance. Thanks, Liz. Any questions? No, colleagues, thank you. People Committee, Adrian?
Just briefly, for assurance, that the job planning software is that process is underway. I know it's something that's been highlighted for in quality. And also in terms of culture, the take up of the second set of the LDKB leadership development programme is underway and progressing well with staff. I believe feedback has been good.
Feedback has been really positive. There have been some tweaks and changes that we've made based on initial evaluation, but feedback has been really positive.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for the People Committee? No. Thank you. The Finance Performance Committee, Karen, this is with the electronic patient record outline business case. Over to you, please.
That's right. Thank you. Just to note, there are 2 3A's reports this month that just reflect the scheduling of committee. So there'll be one going forwards. The one from the 27th of March just formalises the verbal update to board last month. And from F&P on the 17th of April, just to highlight, the committee recommended to the board approval of the electronic patient record outline business case. It's good to see Andy and Tim here if there are any more detailed questions around that. The committee wanted to highlight to the board a recognition that the maximum liability and to progress with the outline business case was £400,000, and that didn't bring with it a requirement to proceed beyond that. So there was a limited liability. The committee also recommended approval to the board of the draft finance strategy, recognising again with some challenges around scheduling that was going to executive directors group yesterday and then onto the trust management group at the end of the month. And the last item the committee particularly wanted to bring to the board's attention was just to recognise the achievement and the hard work and the importance, the significance of having met the 78-week standard, but particularly wanted to highlight the cost incurred specifically around that, and that amounted to £400,000. Those are the highlights from finance and performance.
Thank you. Just for the board colleague, the draft finance strategy will come to the June board because it's going through the committee processes now. And the EPR outline case, the board is asked to approve the outline business case version 1.2, which is outlined in your agenda there. Colleagues happy to approve that? And then I'll just say, Andy and Tim, thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed listening to our debate on the previous item anyway. No doubt we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Policy Committee minutes, 20th of March and 17th of April.
Yeah, so I've covered some of the points already. The only thing I want to highlight relates to Karen's point about getting regular feedback. Is that we decided that and asked Richard and colleagues to develop a new template for care group reports to the Quality Committee. But we also recognise that that needs to be integrated, particularly with reports to the Finance and Performance Committee, because if we're not careful, we load care groups with a whole load of requirements of reporting and attending at meetings, which we have to ask the question about the positive benefits patient care for that, and to utilise the information and data that is now increasingly being reported now at care group level, mirroring the IPR that we spent some time looking at today. So that the hope is that we'll come up with a new approach by the second quarter, but it was partly waiting for Tabitha's arrival and those conversations to take place. So that's an ask we've made. We considered, and we'll come on to the patient experience strategy, but we also approved a new standard operating procedure for quality impact assessments. I think it's really important that the board's aware of that. That's now been approved, including we looked at the standard operating procedure as well that associates with that. And we recognise that over the past couple of years, it's been a bit hit and miss about how we've applied QIAs, quality impact assessments, to proposals. That now will be significantly tightened up. The Quality Assurance Committee will receive 6 monthly reports on how that's being implemented. So I think we can be much more confident going forward that the quality issues and associated issues around quality and such like quality impact will be addressed in business case assessments. Do you want me to say something about patient experience?
Well, we had it in item. We had it in item 4.
I was going to say we've had a detailed conversation about that. The recommendation from the committee was that with some strengthening and consideration about the approach for engaging patients in making improvements in services rather than just asking them about what their experience was like, we could recommend it for approval at the board. I have to say we've got the report now with some changes that have been made. My assessment would be it's made a step towards strengthening it, but as we had that earlier discussion, I really think that we need further work to be done. So I would recommend approval of it with the caveat that we need further work to be done around how we engage patients and users in a comprehensive way, rather than in a sort of piecemeal way that seems to be at the moment around service improvement and how that links with the clinical strategy implementation. I think that would be my recommendation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And if I refer people to agenda item 4, we did have to consider that, and also to consider it within the points that he's just raised under the quality committee minutes. Happy to accept this proposal? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll move us on then, colleagues. Item 11, strategic review, and I'd like to welcome Suzanne Hargreaves. Hi, Suzanne. Welcome here. I'll ask the Chief Executive to lead on this report.
Thanks. So Suzanne's going to walk us through the report, Joe. I'm just going to do 20 seconds of a bit of a crazy. So colleagues will be aware that part of our processes has been the opportunity once a quarter to conduct a strategic review. Where are we against our objectives, lifting us out of the IPR a little bit for key themes, and then we use that to inform any board agendas going forward or our risk framework, particularly the board assurance framework. You'll see in the review today that we're going to make some recommendations around reflections of our workshop that we had on February around our key strategy, to look at the key areas of focus in the context of our strategic objectives, not the operating plan for the coming year. And then we're going to make some recommendations of moving our strategic review process to be part of our annual planning and 3-year cycle of business. I think it was becoming a little operational, even in technical, doing it every 12 weeks. So we're going to make a recommendation to do that in a board workshop annually around the strategic review. And Suzanne's going to just walk us through the key headlines from those 4 sections, Chair, and some recommendations for Suzanne.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. So, yeah, really mindful of the amount of information that's in your board pack. So apologies for that. But for those of you that weren't at that session, I thought it was useful to see the detail that we went into to undertake that review. So obviously, as Aaron has said, we committed to do this strategic review process after we'd signed off the strategy in board in April last year. I will just share a couple of slides with you just to take you through the highlights, because I am obviously really mindful of the detailed information that is within the pack, but just wanted to just bring out a couple of key points just to help the discussion and make sure people are cited on the elements that we want you to approve. So clearly, I've just drawn this slide out because this is it within your pack. This is what we agreed we would do to assess whether the strategy was still relevant. So the domains that we said we would consider was whether the vision of creating a great place to be cared for and a great place to work was evident and was a key focus for the organisation, that the strategy was embedded across the organisation, and that we were making progress in alignment and delivery of the delivery plans. There was evidence that progress was being made against the strategic priority ambitions that we had agreed. And then we also took some time in that workshop to look at the improvement journey. So I know the board have had detailed reports on that throughout this year, and mindful of the progress as we go through into 23-24. So those were the things that we reviewed and spent some time to go through. The agenda then took us through that as a piece of work, and as a result of that, and I'll pause for a second before I go on to strategic priorities so we can chunk up the things that we want to agree in. As a result of that piece of work, I think there was real clear evidence against all of those domains that it was embedded. We looked at lots of data and information. And we felt, therefore, looking in the context, we did an updated SWOT and PESTLE, which you will see within your packs. We looked at external policies and guidance. And I think overall, the conclusion that we're making is that actually there was no evidence to suggest that we needed to change our strategy at the moment. So the conclusion was that we amend it and don't make any amendments, and are happy to continue with the strategic direction and those 4 strategic priorities. So that's the first point that we wanted to just sort of agree as a piece of work. So I'm just hoping that the board, through the review of the detail in the pack, and for those of you that were involved in that workshop, are happy to support that conclusion.
Suzanne, you're approaching this very well because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
Doing that, keep taking us through the recommendations in turn, and I'll ask the board to approve them in turn rather than wait to the end. So just keep bringing us back to the main points. We've all read the document. So the first thing is, we note the output of the strategic review, approve the conclusions, that there is no requirement to change or amend the strategy at this current time. Colleagues, yeah, that's been approved, Suzanne. Just moves on to the next one, please.
Perfect, thank you. So with that in mind, and I'll go to the one that's in the last that Aaron drew out in his summary. The other thing was just the movement, because originally in that sort of look back and the strategic overview in our first document that we wrote that the board approved last year, we said that we would review twice a year. Our recommendation to the board is that we just do that as an annual process. So again, just want to capture that the board are approving that as a shift. So we will do a full review again next year. Probably do it a little bit earlier than the February, because it helps us then to build the key areas of focus. So my aim is we probably do that sort of early January time, December, to do that strategic review.
Okay, thank you. On our document, that's recommendation number 4.
It is.
Okay, approve the recommendations that we do it on an annual process. Colleagues? Yeah. That's been approved, Suzanne, so you've got 2 more.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. So again, just really briefly, and I won't go through the slide deck in focus, as a result of that workshop, we also then spent some time on really clarifying the key areas of focus for 23-24. We reviewed how far we'd come in 22-23. We assessed the national planning guidance. We looked at the improvement programme that we'd had running through 23-24, what was outstanding. And as a result of that, identified 4 key points against each of our strategic priorities to have a focus on for this year. So that was as a result of that workshop. We have then spent further time with our executive team refining those we wills. And alongside that, you will see in the pack, there's a range of metrics. How will we measure? How will we know how we're doing? So those are within the pack as well. So again, I will pause just to just understand that the board are happy to approve the key areas of focus for 23-24.
And it's on page 199 in our documents, paragraph 12. People want to refer to it, but people are happy to accept that proposal? Yeah. Okay, Suzanne, thank you.
Thank you. And then, Chair, I won't spend time on this one, because within the document, within the paper, we have obviously nodded to the transformation improvement programme, so our approach to support delivery as we go through this year. I am minded the board have had many other documents on this as approach, and that you will start to see this evolve as we go through the next couple of months. But really, it was just to approve the approach that we're taking to support our delivery as we move through into 23-24. So, and those are the final points to make. Thank you, Chair.
I know, and the Chief Exec has pointed out several times, that the approach that we've been taken, in fact, the overall paper actually, Suzanne, does impact very heavily on our well-led and how we approach that. So it will be a focus of interest, I think, to an upcoming CQC visit. So people are happy that we continue with the approach. Yeah, thank you. Suzanne, can I just say you are the Associate Director of Strategy. The reason I've given you a title is we have got new members in the board, and I just think it would be really good for new board members and existing members to just come and see you sometime and chat to you and get an overall feel of everything that goes on behind the scenes in the work that you do in this area of developing strategy. So,
thank you, Chair. Happy to do that with anybody.
Yes, thank you. So the concluding part of this report draws your attention to the development of the board assurance framework tradition. Now, as been referenced earlier, there's been an extended planning process, and we're still at the point yet where we haven't been able to sort of agree a control total. So there's an extended period that we're working through. What I can say though is there's two areas of progress within the board assurance framework. Those relate to the Mersey internal audit reports that we had on the assurance framework, which found that the BAF was consistent with the NHS best practice, but did make some changes around content structure and the way that it was presented. Similarly with the well-led review, similar kind of feedback, and again, there was some improvement points there. So the first task that we've done is we've taken to the audit committee a report, not on content, but the structure of the BAF. What are the key data points that we're going to be in there, beginning to make linkages about things like QGAP, better linkages to the IPR and the performance assurance framework, We've also, quality governance assurance framework. We've also as well considered whether or not we would now begin to at least include some narrative and reference to the system board assurance framework, which is also just going through a drafting stage as well. So that's where we are with the board assurance framework. As Aaron alluded to before, we'll be bringing that forward in June for ratification by the board. So work has begun, drafting is underway, and obviously now that we've got the Q4, so areas of focus we can say that about. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. A quick question. It's a connection with Richard and Paul, particularly referencing the well-led inspection and interviews that are forthcoming in a couple of weeks. Just assurance that the board's operating under a current board assurance framework and risk framework whilst we are transitioning to the new. There isn't a cut-off date artificially or otherwise on the 31st of March that says we're operating without one now for 6 or 8 or 9 weeks until it's finalised. I just want to make sure we've got that assurance in place. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And Nico, just for the minutes, please, if we approve the recommendations that are in the paper that have been submitted, but we also know the developments up in the back that you've just outlined there, please. Are colleagues happy with that? Thank you. And I know we'll come back to that. Chief Exec, anything else on this item?
No, just a good piece of work from the board. It's for me, it should start to help inform some of our part 2 work, and I know we're going to talk about the board development programming this afternoon, so we'll take some of these strategic areas into that session also.
Suzanne, thank you. Good to see you as always.
Thank you very much.
We'll move on then, colleagues. Item 12, provide a collaboration update. You have the report, which is a summary of the PCB discussions. Chief Exec.
Thanks, Chair. 2 areas to highlight have been picked up in questions under my CEO's brief, which is the development, particularly at pace now on the clinical integration board work and the central services work. And we know that they're coming to the board in due course for oversight as those proposals are developed. The other areas of priority for the PTB as outlined in the paper are largely about the elective recovery programme as a provider group next year to get the 65-week target hit and the financial challenges that we're all facing. How we want to put ourselves in a place where we can agree to deliver against those collectively and separately. And again, that will be featured this afternoon in the board work.
Okay, we know the report. Thank you, colleagues. It is an issue, I think, that's going to take more and more of the board's time as we move forward through this year. Item 13, new hospitals programme Q4 report. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regular quarterly report. It's not here for a specific issue. Couple of points to draw out. Conscious we've also got an agenda item around this in part 2. So the business case was presented to Treasury in February. Announcement thought was expected in March, will now be May onwards. No date confirmed. But at 3.2, the work continues in parallel. So changing guidance around new hospital builds, standard hospital design, digital and demanding capacity. So that work continues in parallel. Important points in this paper, different to maybe previous regular updates. 4.4, the piece around equality and health inequalities impact is important and is real. The point that Sarah mentioned earlier around the joint piece of work with the Lancaster University around underrepresented people is something I would commend and a good read. And then subsequent points made in section 5 around underrepresented communities and health inclusion. So lots in the paper, all good work and on track, short of any announcement. And so the board's asked to note the progress and note the activities for the next period.
Thank you. And no, there'll be further discussions on this later on today. Happy to know. Thank you. And then infection prevention and control annual report.
So this is the annual infection prevention reports written by our lead nurse for infection prevention. Just the main points from that are that we've had 0 healthcare associated methicillin resistant Staph aureus infections in 22 and 23. We have reviewed the protocol for aseptic non-touch technique. which was felt to be substandard in the organisation and a lack of assurance, particularly from junior medical staff. We have asked the company to come in to actually provide that training and oversight, and that will give us much more robust assurance around the quality of the training. The antimicrobial stewardship, which was approved through the business case, so part one of that, has made a significant contribution to the review of antimicrobials and antibiotics, particularly associated with Clostridium difficile infections. That's allowed a partnership working with the infection prevention team, reviews of Clostridium difficile infections, post-infections, and there is now an antimicrobial management group which is very active. So they're all working together to make further improvements. For assurance, where we have had Clostridium difficile infections, more than one in an area, we ribotype those organisms to check whether there's any causal link. And to date, in 22-23, there has been no evidence of causal link, no evidence of outbreaks, which is really positive. Just to mention that we have been reporting sort of a high incidence of CDI, and we have exceeded our trajectory for the year. But there is a graph in the pack which shows you the national trend for CDI infections, which is really stark. But we're still having a focus on improving our approach to infection prevention. For assurance, there was a development day in March where they launched the catheter passport, and it was particularly focused on bowel and bladder care. And the reason that they're doing that is a reduction in catheter-associated urinary tract infections, which will make a big difference for our inpatient and community patients. So it's a collaborative piece of work across the system. And that's all there is for that paper, and it's just notes and questions.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think you would have read the paper. Again, there is some good evidence there of seedlings and growth in areas that we need to grow. So thank you for that. Yeah, Sarah?
Just because Hugh's just left, I just wanted to note that we've discussed a number of papers at Quality Committee, and we had a number of updates, quarterly updates actually in April. Sorry, I would have had a bit more detail although Hugh was leaving. So just to confirm, we've gone through a lot of the infection prevention work in quite great detail at Quality Committee.
And no assurance issues to be.
No.
Thank you. We'll take that as a cross-reference assurance. Okay. We asked to note the paper. Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Yeah, please pass our thanks to the author. Really good job. Item 15, policy and publication report, Chief Exec.
To highlight Chair for information.
Okay, thank you. You've got the attendance monitoring register, schedule of business. Just check the company secretary, any urgent business being brought to our attention.
No, Mike hasn't.
Okay, thank you. Then colleagues, if colleagues are happy, I'll close the meeting at 11:51.
Mike, can I just?
Oh, sorry.
I know at the beginning of the meeting that we thank everybody in the trust for the work that they're doing and everything, but I'd like to put forward as well from the governor's point of view to thank all the secretarial staff that support us. They don't seem to get mentioned, but they are extremely useful to us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. And Sakti, I'll just check with you as well as a formal board advisor. Anything that you wish to say at the end of the meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No, I've already made my comments during the process of the board meeting, so no more comments from me. Thank you.
I'll just check before I formally close it. You think we've covered all the issues? You've been comfortable with assurances? Okay, I'll close the meeting at 11:51. Thank you. We will.
Thank you.
I've got meetings now at 12, but for the rest of us, by before 12:30 in this room.